Hey there, I'm Yankel, and today I'm going to tell you a little bit about London broil and show you how to make it from frozen and make a beautiful red wine peppercorn sauce at the exact same time. But before we do that, let's talk about the London broil because, as is typical of the beef industry, sometimes the names have nothing to do with the cut of meat, and they can be a little confusing. So, as far as I know, and I'm always willing to learn, so if you know different, let me know. But we don't know anything about London and this piece of meat having any correlation. Now, as far as the broil being part of the name, that is true. It's cut a certain way so that it can be cooked quickly. Typically, London broil, or what we know to be a London broil, comes from the round, which is the rear end of the animal, a fairly well-used muscle. And what that means is it's gonna be really lean. It's going to have a very distinct grain, and you don't wanna overcook it. We wanna be gentle with it. And that means super high heat, really fast. And what we're gonna do is sear it, but then we're gonna finish it in the oven. And cooking it from frozen actually gives you this extra advantage of making it more difficult to overcook because the inside is frozen when it goes into the oven. First thing we're gonna do is heat up our pan and use some high temp oil. I'm using avocado oil, which is really good because it doesn't burn at the high temperature we need to get a good sear. So I'm gonna crank my pan up a little bit, and you want to avoid low temperature or unrefined oils like extra virgin olive oil, which tend to burn as soon as they get really hot. Now, I'm gonna go with just a little bit of salt and pepper here on the surface. Now, as you can see, my London broils are frozen solid. So we're gonna brown them as best we can, and then we're gonna build a little bit of our sauce before we put the steaks in the oven to finish. And I am really curious about the London part of the name, although I haven't found any legitimate evidence stating that they were invented in London. Usually the old cuts, the old names of cuts like Delmonico and maybe London broil or Hamburg have a relationship to either the person or the place that invented the cut. But as far as the London broil goes, who knows? And only 90% of the time would I say they come from the round. They can come from elsewhere on the animal. It really matters more on the shape of the cut, and that being a quick cooking or broiling item. Going into our hot pan, pressing down for some good contact with the surface. When you're doing it from frozen, any type of steak or roast or protein that you cook from frozen, inevitably there's going to be some moisture evaporation, which causes a lot of extra bubbling and steam at the very beginning. That's fine. Cook right through it, just ignore it. As soon as that water burns off, we start to get a really nice sear. And browning these steaks is really about creating flavor. The browning process is called the Maillard reaction, and it's a process where proteins and amino acids and heat all interact to create actual flavor molecules. And that's what we're looking for, building maximum flavor. Let them sit 2.5 to 3 minutes before you flip them so you can really get that nice brown crust. All right, after about 3 minutes on side A, I'm gonna flip them over. And we can see some nice browning starting to happen right there. That one looks pretty good. Gonna repeat the process on the opposite side, just press down, make sure we have really good contact. Now I'm gonna keep the sauce really simple, and bear in mind that you can rotate any of these ingredients in and out. When it comes to a red wine peppercorn sauce, there are 3 key ingredients, and that's red wine, peppercorns, and a little bit of heavy cream to give it some body and hold it together. I'm gonna go a little bit above that. We're gonna add some butter, some shallots, and I have some chopped parsley and a little bit of whole grain mustard. Basically things that I usually have lying around in my vegetable bin or in my fridge that I can add to just bring a little bit more flavor to everything. So once I have a sear on the other side, about 2 minutes worth. I'm gonna add some butter to the pan. And I'm gonna add the shallots now. And you see I rough chop the shallots so that they add a little bit of texture to the sauce as well. Throw those in there. And now I'm gonna baste the steaks, which is basically gonna transfer some of that delicious shallot flavor onto the surface of the meat. In order to baste the steaks, I'm gonna move them to the top of the pan. Let everything else go to the bottom. Make sure the shallots are in that butter and that the butter is bubbling nicely, and then we give our steaks a little bubble bath. Butter bubble bath. Right over the top, just like that. Scoop it up. Perfect. All right, just about ready to go into the oven. The last thing I'm gonna do is add a little bit of peppercorn and a little bit of red wine. So we're gonna go with like a healthy splash. It's gonna evaporate a bit in the oven, and I want it to reduce so that it creates a little bit of a sauce. Perfect. And then peppercorns, about a teaspoon worth. They're pretty sharp. If you've ever popped a whole peppercorn in your mouth and crunched on it, it'll crunch like a half-cooked popcorn kernel. It's really spicy and sharp, and a little bit goes a long way. They're gonna soften up a bit in the sauce, but they're still gonna be pretty peppery. So go easy unless you like a nice sharp peppery flavor, in which case add a little bit more. So I'm going with about a teaspoon there. Give that a little shake, and I'm gonna go straight into the oven, and we're gonna check it in about 10 minutes to check the internal temperature. Don't wanna overcook these, but they are coming from frozen, so it could take a little bit longer. Into the oven we go. So my London broils sat in the oven for about 15 minutes till they hit 110 degrees or so. Now I'm gonna pull them out. I'm just gonna let them rest for a little bit. They're gonna rise to about mid-rare, 120 or so over the next couple of minutes. In the meantime, I'm gonna finish my red wine peppercorn sauce. So I'm just gonna reduce that pan liquid down a little bit more. Medium-high heat, looking for the bubbles to actually grow in size. And as the bubbles grow, that means that more and more moisture is evaporating. So once we see those bubbles grow from little bubbles to medium-sized bubbles, we're gonna stir in our mustard, add our splash of cream, and finish it off with some fresh chopped parsley. And then we'll put our steaks back in and kind of let them heat back up in that liquid. So you can see now bubbles are growing. They're getting a little bit larger. That means it's time for me to scoop in a little bit of mustard. It's gonna add a little bit of body, a little bit of sharpness, which will kind of balance the sweetness of the shallots and of the butter and of the cream. Just give that a little stir. Oh, it smells phenomenal. All that browning that we do at the very beginning contributes so much to this sauce. Really, really good. All right. Now, once we're back at nice bubbling temperature, going in with a little bit of cream. We're gonna let that come back up again, and that's kind of binding everything together. Beautiful. In the very end, we'll add a little bit of salt and give it a taste just to make sure it's what we want. That looks beautiful. I'm gonna hit it with some fresh herbs. Remember, you can substitute any herbs you have around. You can use dry herbs, although I like the fresh parsley because it adds a splash of color. And then we're gonna go right back in there with our steaks. Lower our temperature to a simmer. And I can keep it hot for a little while if I'm not ready to eat, or if I want the steaks to kind of cook up a little bit more, or just kind of rest. And now let's just give it a taste. Barely needs any seasoning at all. It captures some of the salt that we put on the steaks initially. Mustard has some seasoning of its own, So really just a little sprinkle of salt. That is absolutely perfect. All right, we're gonna slice up one of these steaks and then put it on a platter. Well, I know now that you will never be confused again by the name of something, because we know that what matters is where on the animal it comes from. And that is the first step in cooking it perfectly. Also, don't be afraid to cook from frozen. Sometimes it turns out even better. I'm Yankel. Go make a London broil.